Harry and Meghan's New York City trip kind of flew under the radar in the media, which honestly makes sense. Like, why would anyone still be covering Harry and Meghan at this point? And they were just there doing some random nonsense. It really wasn't that important. But something did come out of it that I haven't seen many people mentioning. Harold and the Meg have already abandoned one of their initiatives. Just a little over a year after making a huge song and dance about it. They've basically washed their hands of it. This was something they tried to turn into a big deal for Archewell and for themselves. And they've essentially already ended it. And I haven't seen articles calling this out or discussing how significant that actually is. Which is kind of wild. But at the same time, it's not wild because, like I said, it's Harry and Meghan. So, not that important. So today's video will cover that, plus more details about the whole New York City debacle. And this weekend, we're also going to compare the Sussexes' hollow approach to World Mental Health Day with the real royals who actually did a deeper dive into where the Sussexes went wrong and what it could mean for them. So if you want, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you'll be notified when that video goes live this weekend. And if you'd like to, feel free to click the thumbs up too. Now, onto this little scoop. This piece of news that I just haven't seen many people talking about, even though it's actually pretty important and significant. Remember that really strange interview with Jane Pauley last year? The one where Meghan's mental health came up, and Harry said parents need to be first responders. The one where Jane said she knew Harry would be holding Meghan's hand and supporting her while they talked about her mental health. But he wasn't. He was completely ignoring her. Meghan had her hand on his knee, pawing at him, and he just ignored her. It was funny, but also incredibly awkward, and even in editing, they left it in. Why didn't they fix that? It was embarrassing for everyone involved. It made all of them look bad, even Jane Pauley. Like, what was she even talking about? Was it scripted? But the real point of that interview wasn't to talk about Meghan at all, and it wasn't about showing off their faux touchy-feely dynamic. And no, it also wasn't to give us a better look at her high trousers and badly styled outfit. The actual purpose of that interview was to announce the Parents Network by Archewell. The whole thing was confusing, though, because it wasn't very clear what it even was. We got mixed messages that it was for parents who had lost children due to online harms, but also that it was meant to include general bullying, overdoses involving things obtained online, and more, that completely muddied the waters. Because those are radically different experiences that require totally different approaches when it comes to prevention and protection. Think about it. Two completely different concepts with totally different needs in terms of stopping those things from happening. One involves physical substances, the other is words, experiences, and online behavior. Very different. I'm not saying one is worse than the other. That's not my point. I'm just saying that for the parents involved, this made it an extremely confusing initiative, and that immediately limited its ability to make progress or offer real solutions, because it was far too broad. Basically, anything negative that happened online in any form. If the internet could be connected to it at all, then that's what this network was supposedly for, which is crazy because the internet is massive. So anyway, it was odd because, as we said at the time, it would have been far more impactful to focus on just one thing, like bullying. That alone ranges from distressing experiences all the way to extreme despair and depression, sometimes with tragic outcomes. If they had focused only on bullying, they could have launched meaningful campaigns with long-term impact. But we're talking about Harold and the Meg here, so no chance. They did a bad job. They made it big. They bragged about it, and unsurprisingly, nothing came of it. They made no progress. That Jane Pauley interview, I think it was in August last year, correct me if I'm wrong, was a huge launch moment. They introduced the Parents Network, made it a big deal, said it would change things, that it was innovative, and that's how they landed the CBS interview in the first place. It was basically, we're launching this massive initiative, and CBS was like, okay, we'll send Jane Pauley. They even put out a little statement about it on their website, the one nobody ever looks at, and tried to present this as some big official Archewell milestone. Something they've been pointing to since last summer to say, see, we're doing things with Archewell, look what we've done. We launched an entire network. We're a big deal. Well, Not so fast, clearly. It hasn't been going well, and participation has stayed extremely small. There are no public numbers. Archewell and the Parents Network have never shared how many people joined, signed up, wanted to be part of the platform, used the resources, or participated in anything at all. We don't know how many people even visited the site or engaged with the program. As far as anyone can tell, there were no events, no meetings, nothing. It was just a small, private group with a handful of families. And let me state the obvious here. My heart truly goes out to those families. They've gone through something unimaginable, and they deserve every bit of compassion, support, and help available. It genuinely upsets me that they got tangled up in the Sussexes' nonsense because they deserved far better. They did not deserve to have these two drop the ball on them, to be given hope that there would be a community, support, real action, and meaningful resources. Instead, nothing happened for over a year. And that's awful. That's not okay. So yes, my heart goes out to them. But let's be clear, this is on the Sussexes. These promises weren't kept. There was no real advocacy, no real help, no meaningful resources delivered to these grieving families. And this isn't about criticizing the families. It's about Harry and Meghan failing to do what they said they would do, failing to accomplish anything, failing to even meet the bare minimum. Something as simple as group sessions. For example, we still don't even really know what the Parents Network actually was beyond a website. But now it doesn't even matter, because during that monotone speech Harry gave while accepting an award at the project, Healthy Minds Gala, an award he didn't deserve. And yes, we have a video on that. He announced that the Parents Network is being absorbed by Parents Together. And you might be wondering, why was the Parents Network ever launched in the first place, when something so similar already existed? Something bigger, better funded, more established, Parents Together. And this is exactly why it annoys me that these families were essentially used by Harry and Meghan. They should have just said, "Let's connect you with Parents Together," because that organization is clearly far more equipped to handle these situations and actually help these families. Instead, Harry tried to spin it by saying this was a natural evolution and that they were joining forces, implying some kind of equal partnership. But when you dig deeper, that's not what's happening. The Parents Network isn't keeping its identity. It won't exist as its own thing. It's being integrated, meaning absorbed into Parents Together. The few people who signed up for the Sussex version are now basically being redirected to Parents Together. And moving forward, everything will run through that organization's platform, resources, and systems. So despite the PR spin about a merge, this is really Harry and Meghan stepping away. Archewell, and therefore Harry and Meghan, will no longer be involved in any day-to-day operations at all. They won't be managing anything connected to the Parents Network. Originally, it was run by Archewell. It depended entirely on Archewell and the Sussexes to organize the community and provide support and resources. And in the year plus that it existed, it clearly wasn't successful. So now Archewell is basically handing it over to Parents Together and walking away, with zero responsibility left. No admin duties, no organizing, nothing. The Parents Network is essentially gone, and now it's just Parents Together. The Sussexes and their team will no longer be running anything. Parents Together is taking over those families and providing access to its far more developed resources, its established community, and its much more comprehensive approach, which will serve those families far better than the Parents Network ever did. And they should have been with Parents Together from the very beginning. Like I said, there was absolutely no reason to waste time on Harold and the Meg's Archewell network nonsense. It never should have existed in the first place. So what this actually means is that not only is the Parents Network ending, but Harry and Meghan's and Archewell's role is changing too, because they're no longer in charge of anything. They've arranged instead to be advocates alongside Parents Together, which basically means the same old thing from them, showing up to give irritating speeches full of nothing, talking about topics they barely understand, wearing inappropriate or ridiculous outfits, and striking awkward poses for photos. That's what their involvement is going to look like going forward. Not running anything, not managing anything. They're now in a pay-to-show up and talk type of arrangement with Parents Together, instead of having any real responsibility. And as far as I can tell, None of this has really been officially announced in a detailed way. Harry technically announced that the Parents Network would become part of Parents Together, but he didn't explain what that actually meant. And what I've since found out is what I already said. It's not keeping its identity. It's not operating independently. It's not running anything at all. It's simply disappearing. Now, those families and possibly expanded resources for families who lost children connected to social media harms or whatever phrasing you want to use will fall under Parents Together. They might enhance some resources in that area, sure. But the only real verifiable connection going forward is that Harry and Meghan will occasionally show up to speak, introduce something, or offer support when Parents Together is doing initiatives related to social media safety or online bullying. Parents Together is much broader overall, so when a topic lines up with what the Parents Network used to focus on, they might invite Harry and Meghan to introduce a panel, say a few words, appear at a discussion, or something like that. That's it. That's the extent of their involvement. Beyond that, they won't be involved at all. Now, sure, Harry and Meghan are technically more suited to this kind of shallow, ceremonial role than they ever were to actually running a serious initiative, like they tried to do with the Parents Network. But that doesn't make this a great setup, and it's not something I'm excited about. We're talking about two people who haven't exactly modeled good mental health themselves. Two very controversial figures. So I genuinely hope their involvement doesn't end up damaging Parents Together, but there's a real possibility that it could. It sounds like Parents Together's strategy is to box Harry and Meghan into a very narrow lane, only topics related to online harm and negative social media experiences. And by doing that, they can isolate and protect themselves from too much of the Sussexes' negative influence. But at the same time, we've seen what happens when Harry and Meghan attach themselves to organizations. Donors walk away. Contributions shrink. They get petty with the press. They fight over access, issue corrections over stupid things, steal attention from the actual cause, and end up making everyone, including the organization, look bad. Harry has also shown a pattern of poor oversight and lack of attention, which has led to all kinds of problems in charities and brought negative publicity. And there's also the very real risk that higher-profile advocates or celebrities will avoid getting involved because very few public figures want to be associated with Harry and Meghan or controversy in general. So yes, there are potential benefits here, but there are also real risks for Parents Together. Of course, Harry and Meghan are desperate to make this look less like they've quit and more like some kind of collaborative evolution. So let's take a closer look at what they actually said about absorbing the Parents Network, ending it, and handing it over to Parents Together. Maybe they finally realized they were out of their depth. Who knows? Because if you just read their words, it sounds very different from what it actually means in practice. They've framed it as combining efforts to maximize reach, or something along those lines. But in reality, all that means is that former Parents Network members are now simply Parents Together members. So yes, those families will now have access to more resources, because Parents Together actually has established systems and support in place. The Parents Network had been zero. The same goes for phrases like expanding the scope of the Parents Network. The Parents Network was tiny and under-resourced. Nothing meaningful was done with it over the past year, so now that it's being folded into Parents Together, suddenly there are real resources available and far more support, because Parents Together is a much larger and legitimate organization. Accelerated advocacy just means that Parents Together has already made more progress than the Parents Network ever did or ever could have. They've already launched initiatives and even helped initiate legislation. So compared to the Parents Network, the handful of people who are being transferred over will now experience stronger advocacy in this new space. With this new organization, they'll also gain access to a wider range of support, more events, and more opportunities to participate, contribute, and get involved in campaigns around legislation. Now, expansion, not separation, is another one of those phrases Harry and Meghan like to use. They're trying to make it sound like Parents Together is expanding to include the Parents Network. Like now it's Parents Together and Parents Network, side by side. But that's not what's happening. Parents Together was already huge. Adding a tiny sliver of former parents' network members doesn't meaningfully expand it at all. And it's important to be clear, the parents' network is not operating alongside parents together. It's being absorbed. There is no parents' network anymore. It's just parents together. From what I understand, even though this hasn't been very clearly announced, Parents Together plans to slightly strengthen and refine certain resources specifically for families who lost children due to social media or online related harms. So they'll focus a bit more energy there, but that's not new. They were already doing some of this work. Honestly, they could have just said Parents Together is better equipped to help these families, so we're closing the Parents Network, referring everyone there and offering support and funding for certain projects. But no, Harry and Meghan always have to make everything more complicated and spin it into something it's not. Just tell the truth. Combining efforts and leveraging resources is more PR language that simply means former Parents Network members now get better access through Parents Together, and the Sussexes like to present it as if they're bringing something valuable to the table. But the Parents Network had nothing to offer Parents Together, nothing they didn't already have. So Harry and Meghan's contribution is basically just their public support. And yes, Parents Together will likely continue to build out programs related to online harms and social media safety. But again, those initiatives already existed. How much that area will expand remains to be seen. What we can assume is that Harry and Meghan will stick to those specific topics and stay in that narrow lane. They're not broadly involved with Parents Together. They're just attaching themselves to this one niche issue. It's essentially, please take this project off our hands because we don't know what we're doing. So this is a bit of a gamble for Parents Together. They're a big organization, and it does look like they've limited Harry and Meghan's involvement to this small area of online safety, where, in theory, the Sussexes can provide visibility because they attract media attention. But that attention also brings controversy, criticism, and polarization, as we've seen time and time again with them. This kind of arrangement can also come across as performative, them swooping in to give little speeches when invited, without actually contributing much to the real work of the cause. And honestly, a lot of people who work day in and day out in nonprofits end up resenting that dynamic. The people doing the real grind, the long hours, the unglamorous work, it's their life's passion. And then celebrities or public figures show up, talk for 5 minutes, get headlines, and leave. That can be incredibly frustrating because they're the ones doing all the real work. And the people who swoop in just to provide publicity often lack real knowledge, which can be incredibly frustrating for those on the ground. And I can only imagine how much worse that would be when it's Harry and Meghan involved, two people who are widely disliked, clearly out of their depth, and who, frustratingly, thought they could somehow help these families compete with Parents Together and build something better, and failed completely. They failed these families, and they wasted a year of these people's lives while doing absolutely nothing. So ultimately, whether this partnership succeeds, and right now it seems pretty informal, more like a loose collaboration than anything structured, depends on whether Harry and Meghan can, for once, turn their ability to attract media attention into something positive. There's been no official ambassadorship announced at the time I'm recording this, so the whole thing still feels very fluid, but its potential success really hinges on whether they can stop making everything about themselves. If they could do that, it would actually improve the odds. I recently watched an interview with Jennifer Aniston, someone I don't know much about, where she talked about struggling to conceive for nearly 20 years. Meanwhile, her ex went on to have a big family, and the media constantly speculated that she simply didn't want children, that it was part of why the relationship fell apart. But behind the scenes, she was going through something deeply painful, and hearing her talk about it was heartbreaking. She didn't do it in a self-pitying, navel-gazing way, just in a very human way. And the point is, she now advocates for women's health, fertility access, and related issues. But she doesn't feel the need to explain why every single time she speaks or shows support. Harry and Meghan, on the other hand, seem to believe they have to re-explain their personal motivation for online safety every single time they open their mouths. And in the long run, that doesn't help the cause. Spending all your airtime repeating why you care, why you are there, and how it all connects back to you just means you're talking about yourself more than the issue. It's actually more powerful to quietly learn, over time, that Jennifer had this deeply emotional reason for supporting women's health and fertility access. That makes her advocacy feel more authentic, more legitimate, more focused on the cause, and less focused on her. It almost feels like a way for her to channel that pain into something constructive, to help push forward science, healthcare, reproductive support, and access to treatments. She doesn't need to center herself in it constantly, and that's always been the problem with Harry and Meghan. Yes, connecting something back to yourself can have value, but only if it stays in the background, mentioned occasionally. It cannot be the main event. With them, it is always the main event. It's rare to see them show up anywhere without launching into a speech about why they personally care about online bullying. It's absurd, and it actively undermines the cause, because instead of talking about solutions, progress, or real opportunities for change, they're talking about themselves. That doesn't come across as genuine advocacy. It comes across as performative. But let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really interested to read the discussion. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Have a lovely day, everyone. Bye, Faye.